This conference will now be recorded.
As we know your schedules are busy and we value your participation and interest in this topic. Upon joining the webinar, please type in the chat box your name, school name, your position, school district name, and email address. This webinar will be recorded and posted to MAPS for future viewing. It will be located under the application section under download forms in Wednesday webinar. You can also download our certificate of participation there too. In order to reduce any background noise, you will be muted during the webinar until we take questions. Please write down any questions you have during the webinar, as we will have plenty of time to answer them. During this webinar, we hope you will gain knowledge and a better understanding of successful grant writing. Our objectives are that attendees will be able to list 5 tips for writing a successful grant application, increase your awareness of 2 grant writing resources, and increase your awareness of organizations that offer grants to support food and nutrition in school districts. Before we get started, I want to review a couple common terms in grant writing to help avoid any confusion. An organization may release a request for application, which is sometimes abbreviated as RFA, or a request for proposal, abbreviated as RFP. This is the same thing and is literally basically the grant application you would be using to apply for a grant. The grant proposal is the same as the grant narrative. Those terms are used interchangeably. And this usually is your grant document that you're submitting. So it's your entire grant application and really the meat of your proposal, except it does not usually contain the budget or the budget narrative. The budget narrative is the explanation for requesting the items listed in the budget. It's basically the rationale. For example, if the budget for the salary in a grant is requested to be $500, the budget narrative would include a statement such as, funds are requested to support 1 person at a rate of $20 an hour for a total of 25 hours. And you would show the math, 20 times 25 equals 500. So it gives a very clear explanation of how you came up with your budget. A mini grant or a sub-grant means the same thing. And again, it's basically maybe a grant program that an organization is providing. For example, Montana Team Nutrition offers a Montana Harvest of the Month mini grant program. And this year we were able to fund 14 mini grants at $500 each. So let's go on to the 5 tips. The first tip is really to pay attention to the requirements and the deadline of the grant. So you want to read the application slowly and highlight the key components to address in your proposal. Understanding the purpose, the requirements, the deadline for submission, the budget, and any required attachments will help you determine the research you need to do or next steps for writing the grant. In reading the application for the first time, you may want to use a highlighter to mark the key components. Don't include more in the application than the application asks for in the directions or the requirements section. Again, it's important to follow the rules. Grant reviewers may get annoyed if they have to search for the answers to the requirements or questions or have to view extraneous material. The deadline for the submission can help you plan your timeline for writing the grant. Don't procrastinate and wait to the last minute to write and submit a grant. If you feel rushed, you won't have time to edit it, or you may make math errors on the budget. So for the purpose of going over this process, we are going to look at one grant application that was released from the Office of Public Instruction this last fall. Hopefully many of you are familiar with it. It was called FY, which means Fiscal Year 2019 National School Lunch Program Equipment Grant. This is funded by the Office of Public Instruction with USDA funds. And the goal is to support school districts in obtaining equipment for their food service program in the range of $1,000 to $5,000 to impact the quality and nutrition of school meals. In it, we will see that the key components that you would want to pay attention to are these things that are listed on this slide. We will look at, first there'll be a little introduction talking about the priorities. Then it goes into award selection criteria and funding goals, which is where you want to show that your plan or your application meets those goals and criteria. Goes over the procurement requirements, the application itself, which includes the budget, or in this case, just the total equipment cost, and it's 2 pages, and that's what you really will submit if you apply for this grant. The deadline for submission and the timeline. And it gives a grant scoring rubric, or what some people call criteria. That spells out the points for each section of the grant. So you can tell if something's worth 30 points, you really want to spend more time on that section than if it's only worth 5 points. And then some grants applications do provide what they call a grant application checklist. And in this one it does. And it's a really helpful tool to ensure that you submit, a complete grant. Because if you don't submit a complete grant, sometimes you're knocked out right away. So, thought we could look at the grant application for a minute, if I can figure out this technology, so we can see. I'm just going to go back. Okay, I'm going to unmute Molly. Can you tell me, Molly, if you can see this?
Yes, Katie, I can see the National School Lunch Program School Equipment Grant page.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so this is the grant application, and you will see how I took a highlighter in reading this when I read it the first time and highlighted key things that I would, if I was writing this grant, I would want to pay attention to. You'll see that it is basically a general equipment grant. So if I was a food service director looking for new equipment, it would be of interest to me. The amount is $1,000 to $5,000. That's the amount. I have to at least meet $1,000 and can't go over $5,000. In the introduction, it gives priority to high need schools, which is defined where 50% or more of the enrolled students are eligible for free or reduced price meals. Now, just because it's a priority doesn't mean you can't apply for this grant. It's just that they're going to give priority to those schools. Then the award selection criteria and funding goals. These are key things. Sometimes it's called the grant purpose or the grant goal or criteria, but you want to make sure that your application is aligned with these things, because this is what the whole purpose of this grant is for. So you'll see it really impacts the overall quality of school meals. And that's defined as improving the safety of food served, or the overall energy efficiency of the equipment, or how this equipment is going to help expand participation in the school lunch program or breakfast program. Other sections of the grant go over equipment definition, how to procure the how you purchase or procure is the same, meaning the equipment. Then it gets into what you have to do, requirements if you get the grant, and then the timeline. And you'll see that I highlighted the most important date is when you have to submit, because if you don't submit it on time by, in this case, November 11th, you didn't have a chance to get the grant. Then the next 2 pages basically are the application itself, which it basically goes over typing in contact information and answering questions. So we will come back to this after we go through the rest of the tips. But I just wanted to show you the application is 2 pages, and there's certain questions that you have to answer. And then there's a checklist. And this is the helpful guide I was talking about, because it really goes over, you make sure you complete part 1 cover page. It says answer all questions to receive full points. Make sure you have the authorized representative in MAPS, in your school district under MAPS, sign it. You complete part 2. And then you also have to submit 3 equipment bids to show that you've got, some competition for purchasing the equipment, and when to submit it by and to who, and if you're going to mail it, to where. It specifically says do not send by fax. So that's where these are key things. And the last thing is what you always want to pay attention to. If it gives you the scoring grant rubric, it tells you that it's worth, each application is worth 60 points, and you get so many points per question. So like if you notice that this question, if you have availability of some existing state or local funding for equipment, you get 5 points. If you don't, you get 0. But if you go down to the questions, this part 2, 30 points, that means half of the grant score is from this section. And this is where you would really want to make sure you try to get the total 5 points for explaining how this piece of equipment is going to help your quality nutrition value of meals, how it's going to help you increase participation so you can get those points. You submit 3 bids, you get 10 points. So again, you want to pay attention to this kind of thing if you are applying for a grant. The scoring rubric can really help you. Okay, so let's see. So the second tip that I have for you is that think about writing a grant application as sort of writing your own story, and how you're going to tell your story to address the need or project you want to do. So before you start writing the grant application, you need to spend time drafting your plan and gathering the information to carry out your plan. This may include determining who will work on the project, so you may include a team of people. Or for the equipment grant example, you need to determine which piece of or pieces of equipment you want to purchase, and then obtain a bid from 3 different companies. Because as you remember, you have to submit the 3 bids as part of your grant application. So think about telling your story and writing a grant proposal. You want to clearly describe the need for your project and how it will make a significant impact on your program that ultimately will benefit students. Tell your story from the heart in words that everyone can understand. So keep it simple. If you're writing a proposal that you have to write the narrative, it's not just answering questions like the equipment grant we just showed was, you really want to take the application requirements and possibly make those requirements as section headings in your proposal. This will make it very easy for a reviewer to find the answers to the requirements. So anything you can do to make it easy for that reviewer to find the information they are asking for, you want to do it, because it really does help. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. The third tip is to, again, focus on answering the questions that the grant application asks, or meeting the requirements of the grant that it asks to address, and taking your time to edit or rewrite. The best proposals are easy to read, concise, and understandable. And in order for them to be understandable, I find you have to sort of look at it as a writing project. You write, edit, rewrite, because the more time you look at it, you can read the sentences and make them more concise each time. Less is often more, if you've heard that term. if you focus on answering the questions. If you do that, if you answer them clearly and concisely, the reviewer will understand what you are asking for and how you will carry out your plan. Write and complete sentences. That's very important. And don't use acronyms unless you define them the first time they are used in the proposal. For example, Harvest of the Month may be abbreviated as HOM in capital letters. And if you see that on the slide, we have HOM in parentheses after Harvest of the Month. So it could be abbreviated to HOM after the first time it's used in the proposal. So that's way the reviewer understands that if Harvest of the Month is abbreviated, it's HOM, then the next time you may write Harvest of the Month, you may not write Harvest of the Month, you might just write the HOM program will do this. Don't assume the reviewer knows anything about your program. So spell out the details in concise, complete sentences. I find when I write our team nutrition grant, when I'm first writing the first draft, I just write what I'm trying to do, but then I have to go back 2 or 3 times to edit it to make sure it's concise. And this is where having a co-grant writer is helpful, as they can edit what you wrote to make it more clear and concise. For example, the Harvest of the Month mini grant application that the Montana Team Nutrition Program provides to schools to apply for. On that grant application, one of the questions is to list educational activities that will occur in the school to implement the Harvest of the Month program. And on this slide, I put 2 different responses to this question. The first column is an example of a clear response, where the second column is an example of a vague response. The first column, there are 3 bulleted sentences that spell out what's occurring in the classroom, what's occurring in the food service department, and the library to help carry out the Harvest of the Month program in a school. This is much more clear to the reviewer than just one sentence that may be vague in answer to the question in column 2. So just be clear, doesn't have to be long, but be clear so they really get a good understanding of what you're doing to meet your project. Okay, moving on to number 4. The budget is really an important part of your grant application, grant proposal, and it really needs to demonstrate how it supports your proposal. Therefore, the budget should have requests for only items that are needed to carry out the proposal plan. Be sure to check the math at least twice to ensure it's correct. Math errors are a red flag for reviewers, so take your time in developing the budget. For most grants, a budget narrative is required, which explains how the budget amount was determined. For example, again, in the Harvest of the Month grant proposal, a school requested $300 in the budget for personnel and salary. The budget narrative explains that the $300 will fund 6 teachers to attend the Farm to School Expo at the following rate. 6 times $50 per teacher, which is for a half a day substitute pay, equals $300. So, and you write out 6 times 50 equals 300 to clearly show that's how you came up with that. When we look at the equipment grant example, you will see that the 3 bids that are submitted with a grant application, that's the budget narrative showing that the school got a competitive price for buying that piece of equipment. The 5th tip, and probably maybe the most important one, it maybe should go first, is trying to find some support from your school or community. I encourage you to check within your school district, usually the administration building, office, for resources that may assist you in finding grants or writing the grant application. Oftentimes, there's a grant writer in a district who could be a parent that has experience in grant writing or technical writing, and is either a paid employee part-time or a consultant for the district, or even a volunteer that will assist with grant writing process. So if you're looking to apply for some grants, I would try to reach out to your school administrator and parent chairperson and see if there's any parents that have experience in, or even just like to write. If they have a degree in English, they're probably a really good grant writer. Another recommendation is to form a grant writing team to write your grant application. We do this at Team Nutrition, and it has worked well as one of us may take the lead for a different part of the grant application. For example, Molly may focus on drafting the narrative while I work on the budget. Christine Emerson focuses on getting the federal forms completed and making sure that the process to submit the grant is set up to meet the deadline. If you're participating in the Harvest of the Month program, having a team made up of people from administration, food service, and education to write the grant to support your program is probably a good idea. Because as you know, if you're doing the Harvest of the Month, it is sort of a 3-component program in that you're doing things in the cafeteria to serve the Harvest of the Month items. Teachers are teaching kids about the Harvest of the Month, doing a taste test possibly in the cafeteria or the classroom, and then sharing the information with parents to reinforce education with children and parents on Harvest of the Month. Now, for some resources and looking for grant writing, the 2 resources I recommend are, first of all, before submitting a grant application, when you almost are at the end and have the final draft of your entire proposal, we recommend that you recruit a person that knows nothing about your program to be sort of an objective reviewer. This person should be given the grant application first to read and become familiar with the grant goals, the requirements, the scoring criteria. So they know what that, they're sort of the reviewer and they know what the grant requires. Then they will read your proposal and they can compare it to the requirements. And they'll be able to maybe ask, point out any confusing statements they may have, or any questions that need further clarification. This can really ensure that your proposal meets the goals of the grant application and is clearly written, because you can't assume that the reviewers, even if it's a state program that maybe the Office of Public Instruction knows your school, they may not know your program, so you can't assume they know anything other than what's written on your grant proposal. If you're just starting to write grants, you may check with your administration if they would support a professional development workshop for you on this topic, or to purchase a helpful resource like the one on this slide. The Quick, Wise Guide to Writing Grant Proposals is an inexpensive resource you may want to read. It's available from Amazon for less than $10, and there's an audio version if you'd rather just listen to it, or a written paperback version. And I'd love to hear from anybody if anybody else has other good resources they found to help learn about grant writing when we get to question and answers. Okay, now you may be asking, where do I find grant applications that can support food and nutrition in school districts? So the next 2 slides have some agencies or programs that we have found to fund local school district grants. And I'll make sure that I'll make sure that this presentation is also posted in Maps. And if I get everybody's emails that I can be sure to email you this presentation so you have the direct links and can find these sources easily. So some of the ones listed on this slide obviously are Office of Public Instruction School Nutrition Programs. I want to make sure you know about this school equipment grant. It's offered usually in the fall of each year, and I think we're in our 3rd or 4th year of offering it. And so it can really help your school get some new kitchen equipment. The Team Nutrition Program here at Montana State University, we've been able to fund some Harvest of the Month grants the last few years. And so we've also been able to offer some school wellness grants in the past. It just depends on our funding, but we do like to give funding to schools. Hopefully you know about Montana No Kid Hungry. They've been able to really support expanded breakfast program grants and summer feeding program grants. In the past, they did some after school program ones, so they're one to check out. Fuel Up to Play 60 has student health and wellness grants, and sometimes part of that grant application can help you get a new milk cooler or a blender or Vitamix to make smoothies if it meets the goals of the Fuel Up to Play 60 grant. Some reason why. Let's see. There we go. Hold on. The next slide, this slide gives some additional sources for finding grants. The USDA Farm to School grant actually has a grant application that some of you may be writing right now. It's due on Friday, which can help grow your farm to school program. They've had 2 levels of grants available, one for planning, if you're just getting your farm to school program off the ground, or an implementation grant that is more, once you've got a good foundation, you want to implement. So that is something that you want to look for in the future if you're trying to grow your farm to school program. The Chef Ann Foundation has Salad Bars to School grant program that can help you get a salad bar, and also now some grants to help train staff and transform your school food service operation to a more of a cooking from scratch program. Home Depot has community grants up to $5,000 that can support farm to school, like a garden project or food or educational projects. And then definitely check out any of your local or state foundations that may be available right in your own community. From banks, we found that sometimes banks can help support projects at schools and health related, or health departments, for example, or a local foundation. We found that the Red Ants Pants Foundation, which is in the White Sulphur area, they have some grants that have been able to help schools. So check out those. And when we get to question and answer time, I'd love to hear if you guys know of other sources for grants. Okay, so what I'd like to do is see if there's any questions right now, and then we actually will go through again a grant application, one that's written in a really good one for the equipment grant to show you exactly. We'll review the tips again of what we want to do, what you want to do in a grant application. Okay, so I'm going to unmute you all and allow you to ask questions or provide any suggestions. Okay, does anybody have a question?
Katie, this is Chris. I do want to second what you said about having somebody else read the grant application before submitting it to make sure everything makes sense and make sure that there aren't any spelling or grammar errors, because the grant reviewers do notice those when they read through them. So it just makes the grant look more impressive if everything looks correct and in good shape when it is submitted.
Thank you, Chris, for that important tip. I forgot about spelling errors, and I love it that now there's spell check, because that always helps with checking spelling really quickly. Any other questions or anything you'd like to bring up that wasn't mentioned in my presentation?
Katie, this is Molly, and could I just chime in here for a minute?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. Well, I have been a reviewer on various grants throughout the years, and sometimes it surprises me that grant applications don't provide everything that's asked for. So for anyone who's writing a grant, make sure that you double and triple check that you've provided everything that the grant application asks for. That's a good way to get moved right up to the top of the pile, that you know you have everything there.
Excellent point. Thank you for that. Any other questions? Or what we'll do is just go through one of the equipment grants to show how a school filled it out to just reinforce the key points. Okay, now let me see if I can get through this. Okay, now we're just going to bring up the grant application. Let's see. I'm going to bring up what I'm calling, hopefully you can see this. Hold on a second. Let me get to page 1. Okay. Now, Molly, can you tell me if you can see this? It's the
Yes, I
called the
can.
sample school district. Okay, good. Okay, so this has a school application that a school submitted. This is just an example of a good application that the Office of Public Instruction got from a Montana school. We're calling it Sample School District, and it's from Precise Presley. Okay, so you can see that the grant application itself is just the 2 pages, and the biggest thing is just making sure that each question is answered. So you can see that I'll just highlight that they checked the question number to answer question number 1, that they hadn't received any. They have received 1 USDA grant award already. They answered question 2, that they don't have any additional funding currently available. They answered question 3. And then they go on to answering this information, giving the school name, what they're actually asking for is a 36-inch gas range, and their percentage of free and reduced. So you'll see they are serving about 41% free and reduced. Then what did they forget to do? Did they sign it? You can see they did not, they forgot to sign it. So that's one thing that when we see the rubric, they miss 5 points because they forgot to sign it. So then on page 2, they actually again fill out the school information, and the budget basically is $28.82, 30 cents for buying a South Bend gas range. They filled out it's a replacing equipment of 53 years old. That's a pretty old range, so it sounds like it's really needed. And then you'll see that they answered each of these 6 questions of how that piece of equipment is really going to impact the quality and nutritional value of school meals, how to increase participation, safety, and overall energy efficiency, emphasize more fruits and vegetables in school meals, and adopt school lunch strategies. You'll see that the sentences are complete. Each section is about 3 sentences long, 3 to 4 sentences, so it's not long, but it's very informative, explaining how they're going to do it. And then the 3 bids are actually provided, and they're just scanned in from, the company, explaining the range, showing the cost of the range, and then any kind of shipment prices and things. So if we go through this, you'll see that there's 3 bids included with any information for delivery. Bid 2 made it very clear that was bid 2, and then there's bid 3 coming up. So you can see that it's just making sure that every section of the grant is filled out, and the required attachments is also sent in. The only thing that they forgot to do was sign it. So any questions on this grant application or anything, any questions or confusing areas?
Katie, this is Chris. The missing signature is a common problem, but also incorrect person signing is a common problem. So if it wasn't the authorized representative signing, we would still not give the full points for that. So there again, paying attention to detail is important.
Great. Thank you. And just to find out where they get the authorized signature, is there any specific area in MAPS that you would point them to?
Yes, there is a designated authorized representative in the MAPS application.
Great. And if the food service director didn't know that, would they ask their clerk or superintendent?
Yes, it's likely the superintendent who is the authorized representative.
Great. Okay, thank you, Chris. I just want to check the chat box to see if there's any questions. Otherwise, if there aren't any, which I don't see any, we sure appreciate you joining us today. And please let us know if we can help you with any finding grant applications, or if you have questions. One question for you, would anybody think this would be a good topic for the School Nutrition Conference, which is in June in Great Falls? Do you think this would be a good session, breakout session for that conference? Any input on that? Okay, hearing none, I'm not sure, but I just wondered. Okay, well, thank you.
Katie, sorry,
Yeah.
Katie, they're replying to you in the chat, and they're saying, yes, it would be a useful session at conference.
Oh, good. Excellent. And that's where we could actually have a grant application right in your hands, so it wouldn't be so confusing. It's a little challenging to do it like a webinar, but good to hear from you. Thank you, Vicki and Sarah and Bonnie, for your reply. And I think that's all for now. So thank you so much for joining us. If you need the certificate, just know you can get it on MAPS, and it will also be, this webinar will be posted on MAPS if you want other people in your district to watch it. So thank you, and happy holidays.